So we're going to transfer now over to Jessie. So if we can get PowerPoint up. So as I mentioned, Jessie is a Senior Director of Project Development for APEX, and she works in the Western Interconnection. So we're going to let her talk about some renewable energy development possibilities. Jessie.
So hi, Amanda. Thank you very much for the introduction, and very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this webinar. And I also want to say that I can see many of our colleagues in the industry participating in the call today. So hello to everyone who's out there. APEX is a clean energy company. We can go to the next slide. I just want to talk a little bit about the company and then about the subject of the webinar today. We're a clean energy company. We acquire energy resources. We develop clean energy projects. We build, own, and operate energy facilities. And we do appreciate this opportunity to participate today. I'll be talking just a little bit about the company. Next slide, please. So our projects are primarily located in the middle of the country, east coast of the country, primarily wind, some solar as well, about 2,000 megawatts of wind that are in operation, and about another 15,000 megawatts that are under development. We have a very large development portfolio. Next slide, please. These are our operating wind projects. They're in Oklahoma, Texas, and Illinois. Next slide, please. We also have a couple of 100 megawatts that are under construction right now in Texas. This is a blade going to one of our sites. Next slide, please. So we also have a number of solar projects that we have under development, and I wanted to discuss this one particularly. This is called the Phantom Solar Project. It's a solar facility that's located at the U.S. Army Garrison in Fort Hood, Texas. The COD is actually officially now May 3rd, and it's a 15 megawatt facility. It has a 28-year PPA with the Defense Logistics Agency, and it actually is a hybrid project. Its output is combined with the output of the Cotton Plains project, which is a 50 megawatt project located in Floyd County, Texas. And I wanted to mention this project specifically because it's an example of how our company can work in partnership with larger agencies or federal entities to develop these kinds of projects. So next slide, please. Touching on the subject of our talk today, the Navajo Generating Station. This, as you know, is a 2,250 megawatt coal-fired power plant that is scheduled for closure in 2019. And the Navajo and Hopi nations have said that they're considering other uses for the land and associated transmission lines, including solar and wind generation. So just looking at this map, you have the Navajo Generating Station, retirement 2019. You have San Juan, 2022, Four Corners, 2031. You have a major transformation of the coal generation in this whole northern part of Arizona, and clearly that's created a lot of interest in the industry. Next slide, please. So certainly, as wind energy developers, we note that there is a very strong wind resource located in New Mexico that can be supplied to Western markets. And this wind resource has been amply discussed in processes like the West Connect process or CAL-ISO studies as basically a balancing resource that can balance solar and other generation in WECC. And certainly the Four Corners transmission system, including the Navajo Generation Station, could be used to export this wind resource. Next slide, please. There's also, we should mention, a modest resource in Arizona. Tucson Electric Power recently announced that it would purchase a 100 megawatt project in Arizona, and DOE has studied another similar project near Winslow, Arizona. And certainly recent proposals could provide a larger market for wind energy in Arizona. Next slide, please. Clearly also there's a robust solar resource in the region. And in the next couple of slides I'll talk about that. So regarding the solar resource, clearly one thing that comes to mind and has been, I think, fairly alluded to or discussed in the press is the possibility of putting in solar. And so we envisioned a 250 megawatt solar plant here. Could be built over the next couple of years. It would have a good, robust solar resource. It would produce something along the lines of 400, 450 gigawatts per year at 250 megawatts. I didn't note it here, but it probably would have a storage component, which utilities are increasingly looking for. And it would create a significant number of jobs, probably 750 to 1,000 jobs during construction, and 45 jobs or so during operation, while occupying a fairly compact land area, about 2,200 acres. Entitlements, permitting, probably a CEC for a transmission line if needed, and probably going through the Bureau of Indian Affairs if it's on tribal land. Next slide, please. So clearly, one of the greatest benefits of this type of project would be the employment opportunities for general laborers, for electricians, for carpenters. If you've been reading in the press, it's been announced recently that solar is creating the greatest number of jobs compared to coal or other resources outside natural gas. Solar is a very big employer, and plants like this do create a lot of employment. It also would create revenue from lease payments, community benefits, and certainly a low resource impact in a region that's been very, very severely environmentally impacted by coal generation. So no water use, no air emissions, no waste production. Next slide, please. Finally, there's a very recent example of this type of project done very successfully by the Moapa Band of Paiutes, 250 megawatt solar project commissioned last month in near Las Vegas in Nevada. And this was also occasioned by the closing of another coal plant, the Reed Gardner coal plant. It was the first utility scale solar plant built on tribal land, but certainly not the last. So we thought this was an excellent example, and certainly we'd like to see it replicated. Next slide. So thanks very much. Please feel free to ask questions.
Okay, Jessie, thank you very much. So again, you have a chat box where you can ask questions. I've got a few, and if you want to keep them coming, I'd love to ask them because we have quite a bit of time still. So Jessie, first question is back on the chart that you had, you said built by 2019. The question is, can you tell us how long does it take to build the type of solar project that you have listed on this chart?
Sure. So we've estimated about a 20-month construction period here, which would mean very, very short permitting. And that really depends. I think that other projects, depending on where they're located, can take considerably longer to permit. So this is really counting on a very short permitting period. Okay.
And does that include any kind of site prep work and getting permits and all that? That's the entire development time?
So yes, it does. The construction period certainly includes the site work, and it's just a question of how long the permitting itself will actually take, depending on what agencies you have to go through. It might be towards the end of 2019, for example, or going into 2020 if you have to have much more scoping time with agencies.
Okay. Okay. I have a whole bunch of questions here, so I'm going to try to get to most of them. Can you please comment on what you meant by storage component for this particular project?
Certainly. Yeah. So, for example, we saw Salt River Project announced today a PPA for a 20 megawatt solar project with 10 megawatts of lithium ion storage. And when you look at the IRPs in Arizona that are being released by the various utilities, you see, for example, APS looking for 300 megawatts of storage in the next 10, 15 years. You see storage really becoming very prominent as a resource that's being added on together with solar. And so I think it would certainly be worthwhile considering it here.
Okay. Another question, can you comment on the range of typical land lease payments or other royalties that a project like your 250 megawatt solar project might generate?
Yeah, remember that the land area itself is fairly compact. And so I think it's sort of safe to say that wind royalties to some extent shaped people's vision about solar royalties in the sense that you use much less land, but you want to bring in a fairly similar type of income. And so consequently, you would see, I think, something like probably $400 to $600 per acre per year once the project is in operation.
Okay. There's a question about jobs. They mentioned that you can have quite a few construction jobs during construction of a plant, but once the plant is operational, then the number of jobs is going to go down significantly, correct?
Correct. It's just a function of this type of technology.
Okay. Can we go back to the slide that reviews the dates of closures of coal plants? Okay. And there's a couple different questions here around there's 2,250 megawatts of capacity on the transmission system, or that's what's being removed. Why is Apex only proposing a 250 megawatt plant at this site, or is that what you are proposing?
A very good question. A very good question, obviously. It's mostly just a function of exactly the earlier question, construction time and financing resources. You typically will see projects that are going to be constructed in the 2019-2020 timeframe that will be limited to this type of size. You could certainly do a much larger project. You could do a project that's a 2,000 megawatt project here with certainly a bigger aggregation of resources, or, for example, by inviting multiple companies to develop multiple projects in the area.
Okay, and that goes with a couple more questions coming. So one is there a possibility of combined wind and solar plant at or near the MGS site?
Well, I think that there is. I did give that example of our Texas project earlier, which is a combined wind and solar project. It brings in the wind resource from an area where the wind resource is better. And so certainly you could do a combined wind and solar by bringing in wind from some of the more high resource wind regions that are located either in New Mexico or in other parts of Arizona. And you could certainly combine it with solar generation, which is amply available in that entire Four Corners region.
Okay. And another question is, a power plant could be, or a solar or wind plant could be connected at the Four Corners, at the Navajo generating station location, but are there other areas of interest to renewable energy developers given the coal plant closures that you mentioned?
Yes, I think there is a fair amount of interest around the San Juan Four Corners region, particularly, and there's been a lot of discussion about that.
Okay. I'm getting great questions on the web, so I appreciate that if you want to keep them coming. So here's a question for either Charlie or Jessie. How does APS joining the California Independent System Operator Energy Imbalance Market impact the available transmission capacity from Navajo and Four Corners heading westward? An easy question.
First of all, I'm going to guess that it does not impact ATC at all. The energy imbalance market is a very, very close term commitment within an operating hour. It's a 10 to 15 minute ahead selection of a generating resource to either come online and be delivered, or to reduce capacity to make for the balancing. In that instance, it is relying on capacity that is available within the operating hour, which is after any commitments would have been made even for an hourly schedule. So it's designed to function on excess capacity within the normal operations of the system, taking into account all of the reservations that have already been made prior to that operating hour start.
Okay. Okay. There's a question here that I don't know if either of you can answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways, which is, do we know if there's any interest from the current owners of NGS in a conversation to solar, so in a conversion to solar? So is there interest by the current owners in developing solar projects, or owning or buying? Do we know?
I certainly don't know, Amanda.
Jessie?
And it may not be across the board.
I don't know either, Amanda. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off, Charlie. Okay, so here's a question. Would the proposed 250 megawatt solar project, or I'll say any solar project, at Navajo be competitive with other solar projects, and why?
Hi, this is Jessie. So that's a good question, and it's a little bit hard to say. Certainly, it depends on where the other solar projects are. So, for example, we didn't really talk about this specifically with Charlie, but if you were able to send the power north, you would find markets to the north where certainly this type of solar power would be very competitive. If you're competing with projects to the south, you might have certain challenges. On the other hand, those projects have their own challenges regarding negative pricing and transmission difficulty to interconnect, and so this project might have some advantages in those senses.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. Amanda, I can add to that. I think the advantage might be that the existing transmission system, and depending on where another solar resource is located, they may have to pay for a more expensive alternative for transmission. So that's part of the mix that I think any developer would need to look at in where they place a resource.
Yeah, yeah. And isn't it true that if I'm an owner and I buy the power for, say, a solar or a wind plant, if I already have that transmission capacity, then I've already paid for that. So doesn't that give me, wouldn't that be a lower cost project versus buying a solar project from somebody who has to purchase transmission rights?
It certainly seems to me like it would be.
Okay, okay. So there's just a general question here. What is the cost of a solar plant project?
So I think you could use the metric once you're talking about all of the costs, development costs, construction costs, and so on. probably 1,200 to 1,300 per kW.
Okay. And can you translate that into a megawatt hour cost, or is that too hard to do because there's too many variables?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see it. I wouldn't quite put it that way, but I would say we're starting to see solar projects in the market in Arizona and Nevada that are starting to go below $30 per megawatt hour.
And so that's less expensive than new natural gas?
Yes, considerably less expensive.
Okay. So changing gears a little bit here, what steps can Navajo and Hopi take right now to make a project site more attractive to developers?
I would say it really come out with a focused development plan as a partner. Come out with a vision that says we want to develop this area, and we want to, it might say we want to develop this area for solar. It might say we want to use the transmission infrastructure to facilitate bringing in wind. It might be both, but come out with kind of a plan to bring in developers as partners.
Okay. Here's a question for Charlie. Is there any tie into WAPA's, into the Western Area Power Administration system at Glen Canyon available at the Navajo Generating Station site?
There is a western line very close to the site that is not interconnected. That would be a potential tie, but that's about all that exists at this point.
Okay. And a reuse question. How much of the Navajo Generating Station equipment and plant and transmission could be reused for solar or wind projects?
I think really only the substation.
But the transmission's there, so that would remain.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know that the plant itself could really be repurposed.
Right. Okay. Good. Charlie, anything on that?
Yeah, I would say that the plant site itself is a fairly large area. So if you just looked at the land set aside under the lease, there's quite a bit of room for certainly for solar development, I would think, within the confines of that area. Don't know about wind.
Okay. So I've got a couple more questions, and then Jessie and Charlie, I'm going to ask if you want to make any kind of wrap-up statement. We look like we might end a couple minutes early. So two more questions I have is, could the Hopis or Navajo buy up the transmission rights?
The answer is yes, but that would be a matter of negotiation with existing owners.
Okay. Would they have to go through the same type of OASIS system, and they would go through the same process that any developer would go through, or could it be different?
No, it would be the same. If they're looking to purchase capacity on the existing system, it would be just like any other user of that system.
Okay. Okay. Are there any reason to think about a solar thermal plant there to repurpose the Navajo generating station? So is there any consideration for solar thermal in that location?
I have worked in solar thermal before, and I think until there's really mandate for, well, I was going to say until there's a mandate for on-site solar storage at scale, it would be difficult to, as well as the resource there, which is not the strongest DNI for a solar thermal plant, it's a little hard to say that it would be. That said, storage is, as I said, a big part of some of the IRPs that we're seeing coming out, and so yeah, it's certainly it's something we could think about.
Okay, so that's all the questions that I have on the chat. So Charlie, do you want to give any kind of wrap up about, okay, so we've got this big plant closing and we've got this transmission, you know, potentially available. Do you want to give any closing comments?
I can't offer much, Amanda. It's certainly I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with these folks, and I would, if there are follow-on questions that come in, I'd be happy to try to address those as well. But certainly it is a proven transmission system, been in operation for 40 years or more, transmitting a tremendous amount of electricity very reliably in that part of Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly seems that if uses can be made of it, it can continue to be that kind of a viable resource.
And it sounds like to me that we're just a little too early to know what the owners are going to do with transmission, because I think most people realize that the definitive date of the closure of the plant, we don't know that yet. And so I guess it's a stay tuned on the transmission picture, because the owners have the transmission first and they can decide to keep it or give it up to the market. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It is their resource.
Okay, great. Thank you, Charlie. Jessie, do you want to close with anything?
Yes, Amanda, I would just say that this clearly is a historic opportunity. It's a very interesting opportunity for the industry and for supporters of clean energy in general. And so certainly we applaud this webinar and this effort to think about what can be done with this opportunity. And I think something that could be interesting in the near future would be to have perhaps a broader discussion that would include more of the parties to this opportunity, both the tribe participants and the current transmission owners, for a broader discussion, because I think there could be a lot of interesting opportunities that would come out of that.
Okay. And I do see that I missed one question that somebody pinged me on again that said, is Apex in conversation with the tribe?
Well, as a matter of fact, one of our transmission engineers used to work for the Navajo Tribal Energy Authority, and so we have been in the past, and I think we will be again soon. We certainly are looking forward to it.
Thank you. Well, one of the reasons that we decided to do this webinar is, as the Four Corners Wind Resource Center, we talked a lot about solar on this webinar, but this is the windy region of Arizona. We certainly have very good wind resources in New Mexico and our other Four Corners states. And so when we thought about the impact of this transmission plant, one of the reasons why wind is not purchased more in this region is because of lack of transmission. And so here comes an opportunity to be able to access that transmission for wind and solar. And having worked in the state of Arizona for years and years on wind issues, it's just not a resource that we talk about a lot. But I think one of the things Jessie said that was very important is that the wind resource is complementary to the solar resource that we have all over the state. So I think there is broad opportunity. If we see an opportunity for doing a follow-on webinar that we think would provide good information, we certainly will do that. I appreciate everybody's attendance today. This webinar was recorded. It will be posted on our Four Corners Wind Resource Center site, and that's www.fourcornerswind.org. So we greatly appreciate everybody's attendance today. Charlie, thank you very much for all that you do for transmission in the West. Jessie, keep up the good work. Go be hugely successful on developing wind and solar projects. Thank you everyone very much.